Saraswati Vidyalaya Union High School and Junior College welcomes all the students of Standard 9. I, Mrs. Manisha Chaudhary, is here to present Political Science, Chapter 6, International Problems, Part 3. Stockholm to Paris Conference. In order to discuss the immediate and long-term problems related to the environment and to find solutions on them, a United Nations Conference on Human Environment was called at Stockholm from 5th to 16th June 1972. In this conference, it was stressed that it is the responsibility of all nations to cooperate to overcome pollution. The developing nations feel that the developed nations are more responsible for the decline of the environment and they should take the responsibility for stopping the decline. Even today, the developing countries take the same position. Another feature of this conference was that the non-governmental organizations working in the field of environmental protection were also present. So, students, we saw last time that how because of the environmental pollution, so many things are affected. We saw that there is decrease in the fertility of the soil, water shortage, fluctuation in the proportion of rainfall, then the drying up of rivers and lakes, pollution of rivers, the thinning of the ozone layer. So, in order to restrict all these and to save the environment, conferences were held. Now, first it was held at Stockholm from 5th to 16th June 1972. And as we can see, the first point, in this conference it was stressed that it is the responsibility of all nations to cooperate to overcome pollution. So, first of all nations should cooperate in this process to overcome pollution, that how we can stop pollution. Second point, the developing nations, they felt that the developed nations are more responsible for the decline of the environment. That is what the developing nations felt, because the developed nations were more modernized, more industries, and most of the technologies were advanced. So, the developing nations, they felt that the responsibility should be taken by these developed nations to stop the decline of the environment. Even today, the developing countries take the same position. Even now, it is the same thing, that the same stand is taken by the developing countries. Then another feature of this conference was that the non-governmental organizations working in the field of environmental protection were also present. So, not only the government but also the non-governmental organizations were also present for the protection of environment. Let us see further. The issue of the protection of the common global wealth was raised. A consensus emerged that it was the responsibility of all the nations to protect these resources. So, the another issue which was there was the protection of the common global wealth. So, whatever wealth is there, global wealth means across the world, that should be protected. A consensus emerged that it was the responsibility of all the nations. So, all nations should take up this stand and protect the global wealth. Next point, it was after this conference that the United Nations created the United Nations Environment Program. So, UNEP. So, after this conference, all the nations, they created United Nations Environment Program, that is UNEP. Many international treaties about environment were signed after this conference. several rules were made about the protection of environment. So students, we can see that after this many international treaties were signed which were related to environment, and several rules were made for the protection of the environment. Let us see the next point. Environmental movements started on a large scale at national as well as at the international level. Non-governmental organizations also assumed a bigger role in the decision-making process at international conferences regarding the environment. So, environmental movement started on a large scale. Now, slowly and slowly, these movements were more, and it was at the means not only national but also at international level, means all over the world, and non-governmental organizations were also given a major part, means they also assumed a bigger role in this decision making process at international conferences also regarding the protection of environment. The next stage was the environmental conference at Rio in 1992. In this conference, the idea of sustainable development was stressed. Different treaties regarding biodiversity, climate change due to greenhouse gases, protection of forests, etc. were signed. So, finally, the next stage was the environmental conference, which was in the year 1992 at Rio, and here it was decided, and the idea of sustainable development. Now, what is this sustainable? The use of natural products and energy that does not harm the environment. So, such products and such energy should be used which does not harm the environment. That was stressed, and then for that different treaties were signed regarding biodiversity, climate change due to greenhouse gases, then protection of forests, etc. These all were signed. In 1997, the Conference of Kyoto laid down the protocols for the developed countries for preventing climate change. These are applicable for 15 years. So finally, in 1997, students, we can see that a conference was held at a place called Kyoto, where it laid down the protocols, that is the rules, and it was mostly for the developed countries. And what were the rules? That they should prevent climate change. No climate change should occur because of their inventions or because of their further discoveries, and this was applicable for 15 years. After this, a conference on climate change was held in Paris in November 2015. An appeal was made in this conference that all nations should make concerted efforts to stop climate change and global warming, and that the developed countries should help the developing countries to acquire the technology to achieve these goals. Then finally, students, in 2015 at Paris, okay, now Paris is in France. Now in Paris in November, a conference on climate change was held, and there was an appeal made, a request was made to in this conference that all nations should make efforts to stop climate change. So no climate change should happen. All nations should make efforts with respect to that, and also stop the global warming. Now you might have learned already that there is global warming, means the earth is getting heated more every year than it's usual, and because of that the ocean's level is rising, water level is rising. So there is a danger that in future the coastal places which are next to which are there to the sea, they may go underwater, and there are so many other problems because the ice is melting and the level of the oceans is rising. So this global warming has to be stopped, and this global this heating of the earth is because of the pollution and because of the so many scientific discoveries and things which are done which endanger environment. So all these things should be controlled. and that the developed countries should help the developing countries to acquire the technology to achieve these goals. So the poor developing countries should be helped by the developed countries to achieve all this technology and also to achieve these goals and to stop the climate change, to stop the global warming. Now let us see the below part. Do you know oceans, deep sea beds, atmosphere, outer space, genetic resources are included in the global resources. Since this wealth of resources belong to all the nations of the world, it is expected that all nations should look after it. So, students, all the oceans, then all the deep sea beds, atmosphere, outer space, then all the genetic resources, these are all included in the global resources. They are our global resources, that is, this all belongs to our Mother Earth. And since this wealth of resources belongs to all the nations of the world, so it is our joint effort, it is our joint moral value that it is expected that all nations should look after it. So we should take it as our duty, and then all nations should look after it, should conserve it, and should protect it. So students, will stop here. Thank you. Read the lesson till here.